My husband of 7 years always showered with his phone face down on the bathroom counter. I never thought anything of it. I trusted him completely, the way you trust the floor beneath your feet or the air in your lungs. But 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday night that felt completely ordinary, that phone lit up in the dark. It vibrated against the marble counter, a sharp buzzing sound that cut through the noise of the running water. I glanced over from the bed where I was folding our baby's laundry. The lock screen read a message from a contact saved as boss. It said, "He's asleep. Come over to the main house now." But the profile picture wasn't a corporate logo. It was a photo of my own mother's dog. In that single, fleeting second, the entire foundation of my life evaporated. The man I loved and the woman who gave me life had turned my home into a crime scene. To understand how a heart breaks this completely, you have to understand how exhausted I was. 6 months ago, I gave birth to our daughter, Lily. It was a traumatic delivery. I lost a lot of blood, and the recovery left me physically shattered and drowning in severe postpartum depression. I felt like a shell of a person, waking up every 2 hours in a fog of tears and fatigue. Mark was incredible during those first few weeks. He would hold me while I cried, rock Lily to sleep in the quiet hours of the morning, and whisper that we were a team. When my mother offered to sell her condo and move into the guest house on our property to help us, I wept with gratitude. I felt so incredibly blessed. I had a husband who adored me and a mother who was willing to uproot her entire life to catch me while I was falling. My mother became a fixture in our daily routine. She would come over at 6 p.m. every evening, cook dinner, and watch Lily so Mark and I could get a few hours of uninterrupted sleep. I remember sitting on the living room rug, watching my mother hold my daughter while Mark sat beside her on the couch, laughing at something she said. I remember looking at them and thinking that I was the luckiest woman in the world. I thought I was surrounded by a fortress of unconditional love. I didn't realize the fortress was actually a cage. The red flags were small. When you are operating on 3 hours of sleep, your mind naturally rationalizes the anomalies to protect your sanity. It started about 3 months ago. I woke up around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water for my parched throat. As I walked down the carpeted hallway, I noticed the kitchen light was casting a long, golden sliver across the hardwood floor. I crept downstairs, thinking Mark had forgotten to turn it off. Instead, I found Mark and my mother standing by the kitchen island. They weren't making bottles or cleaning. They were just standing incredibly close, speaking in low, hurried whispers. The moment my foot creaked on the bottom step, they snapped apart. My mother instantly smiled, her face adjusting to that warm maternal mask I had known my entire life. "Oh, sweetie," she murmured, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy. "You should be resting. Mark and I were just going over the schedule for Lily's doctor appointment tomorrow, so you don't have to worry about a thing." Mark nodded quickly, stepping forward to wrap his arms around my waist, kissing the top of my head. "Go back to bed, honey. We've got everything handled," he whispered. I swallowed my water, thanked them both, and went upstairs. I blamed my uneasy stomach on postpartum anxiety. I told myself I was crazy for feeling a sudden icy chill in my own kitchen. But the coldness only grew. Mark's phone habits shifted in a way that became impossible to ignore. He began keeping it in his pocket at all times. If he set it down on the kitchen counter to wash his hands, it was always face down, the screen hidden from the world. One afternoon, I reached out to grab his phone to take a quick photo of Lily doing something cute. Before my fingers could even touch the glass, Mark snatched it away. His movement was violent, a sharp, instinctual panic that made my heart drop. He caught himself a second later, forcing a nervous chuckle. "Sorry, babe. Work emails are crazy today. Confidential client stuff. I don't want you accidentally seeing a project preview." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "Mark, it's me," I said softly, the exhaustion making my voice crack. "Since when do we have secrets?" He stepped closer, cupping my cheek with his hand, but his eyes were completely empty. There was a distance in them that terrified me. "No secrets, I promise. You're just stressed, okay? Let your mom and me handle things for a bit. You just focus on healing." Every time I expressed a doubt or felt an inquiry of unease, they used my own medical vulnerability against me. They told me I was tired. They told me my hormones were imbalanced. They made me feel like an unstable narrator in my own life, twisting my reality until I began to doubt my own eyes. I became entirely dependent on them, relying on the very two people who were quietly tearing my soul apart. Which brings me back to that Tuesday night. The rain was drumming a rhythmic, mournful beat against the bedroom window. Mark had gone into the bathroom to take a shower, leaving his phone face up on the counter for the first time in months. A careless mistake that would cost us everything. I was sitting on the edge of our bed, folding a tiny pink onesie, when the phone buzzed. I didn't mean to look. I didn't want to be the paranoid, suspicious wife. But the screen was bright, and the name Boss flashed clearly in the dark room. I stood up, my legs feeling entirely heavy, like walking through deep water. I stepped into the bathroom. The air was thick with warm steam and the scent of the sandalwood body wash I had bought him for his birthday. Through the frosted glass of the shower, I could see the blurry outline of my husband, completely oblivious. I reached out a trembling hand and picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the glass. My heart was beating so violently against my ribs it felt like it would burst through my skin. I tried his passcode. It didn't work. I tried our daughter's birthday. Incorrect. The shower water continued to cascade down, giving me precious little time. With a sick, hollow feeling rising in my throat, I typed in my mother's birthday. The phone clicked open. The screen did not just open, it shattered my reality. The home screen was a generic pre-installed wallpaper, but the messaging app icon had a bright red notification bubble sitting over it. My thumb hovered, shaking so violently that I nearly dropped the heavy glass device onto the marble floor. I took a deep, silent breath, the steam from the shower filling my lungs with a suffocating warmth, and tapped the app. The conversation thread with Boss was at the very top. I clicked it. I expected to see a few flirtatious messages. I expected to find a recent mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment that would break my heart but perhaps leave room for an explanation. Instead, as I scrolled upward, the thread went back months. It went back to the weeks right after I brought Lily home from the hospital. While I was upstairs in our bed, bleeding, crying, and trying to learn how to be a mother, my husband was texting my mother from the living room sofa. The messages were not just physical. They were cruel. "She's finally asleep," Mark had written on a night in August. "She's completely useless lately. All she does is cry. Come over." My mother's reply came a minute later. "On my way, darling. Leave the back door unlocked. She won't wake up. She's completely out from the medication." I felt a sudden violent wave of nausea hit my stomach. I had to press my free hand against the cold bathroom wall to keep my knees from buckling. The room began to spin. The sandalwood scent of Mark's body wash, which I used to find comforting, suddenly smelled toxic, like rot. I kept scrolling, my eyes burning as I forced myself to read the words. They mocked my postpartum depression. They laughed at how easily they were fooling me. My mother, the woman who held my hand when I was in labor, the woman who wiped my brow and told me I was a beautiful mother, was actively stepping into my bed the moment I closed my eyes. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Mark asked in a text from October. "No," my mother replied. "I told her she has postpartum anxiety and needs to rely on us more. She believes everything I say. She's too weak right now to question it." They had weaponized my mental health. They had deliberately made me feel insane just to keep their vile secret safe. A hot, heavy tear escaped my eye, tracking down my cheek and hitting the phone screen with a soft tap. I quickly wiped it away with the back of my hand, terrified of leaving any trace that I had been there. Through the frosted glass of the shower, the water suddenly stopped. The sudden silence in the room was deafening. The rhythmic patter of the rain outside was the only sound left. Panic seized me. My mind raced. I couldn't let him know I knew. Not yet. If he knew I found out, he would delete everything. He would call my mother. They would coordinate their stories, and they would convince everyone in our family that my postpartum depression had finally caused a psychotic break. They would take my daughter from me. With seconds to spare, I opened my own text thread on his phone. I selected the most damning screenshots of their messages, the ones detailing their meetups in our guest house and their plan to use my medical state against me, and forwarded them directly to my own number. As soon as the bubble sent, I held down on the messages on his phone and hit delete, clearing any record that the text had been sent to me. I locked his phone, placed it exactly face down on the counter, precisely where he had left it, and slipped out of the bathroom just as the shower door creaked open. I threw myself back onto the edge of our bed, grabbing the pink onesie I had been folding. I tried to force my hands to stop trembling, but I couldn't. I held the tiny piece of clothing against my chest, staring blankly at the bedroom door. Mark walked out a moment later, a white towel wrapped around his waist, his skin damp and smelling of clean soap. He looked at me and smiled, that same, boyish smile that had made me fall in love with him 7 years ago. "You okay, babe?" he asked, walking over to his nightstand. "You look incredibly pale." I swallowed the lump of bile in my throat. I forced my lips to stretch into horrific imitation of a smile. "Yeah," I whispered, my voice sounding completely hollow, like it belonged to someone else. "Just really tired tonight. Lily was fussing earlier." Go to sleep, he said softly, stepping closer and kissing my forehead. His lips felt like ice against my skin. Your mom will be over at 6 a.m. to help with the morning feeding anyway. We've got you covered. I lay down on my side of the bed, turning my back to him as he turned off the lights. In the pitch blackness of our room, I pulled my phone out from beneath my pillow. I deleted the texts I had forwarded to myself so he wouldn't see them if he checked my phone while I slept, but not before saving every single image into a hidden, password-protected folder in my cloud storage. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the steady, peaceful breathing of the man who had systematically destroyed my soul, I didn't cry anymore. The sadness was there, heavy and crushing like a mountain on my chest, but beneath it, a cold, hard resolve was beginning to form. They thought I was weak. They thought my grief made me fragile. They were about to find out exactly how strong a heartbroken mother could be. The next morning arrived with a brutal, unforgiving brightness. At exactly 6 a.m., the soft, familiar click of the front door lock echoed up the stairs. It was a sound that used to bring me an immense wave of relief, the sound of my mother, arriving to save me from another sleepless morning. But today, that click sounded like the locking of a cell door. I lay frozen under the covers, my eyes wide and bloodshot, staring at the ceiling. Beside me, Mark stirred, groaning softly as he checked his phone. He didn't notice me watching him from the corners of my eyes. He immediately opened his messages, his thumb flying across the screen for a brief second before he tucked it away. I knew exactly who he was texting. I'm going down to help your mom with Lily, Mark murmured, leaning over to kiss my cheek. I had to summon every ounce of willpower in my body not to flinch away from his touch. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to drift back to sleep, and let out a faint, exhausted mumble. As his footsteps faded down the hallway, I sat up. The physical sickness from the night before had settled into a dull, heavy ache in the center of my chest. I walked to the top of the stairs, keeping my bare feet silent against the carpet, and peered through the banister. Down in the kitchen, my mother was rocking Lily in her arms, humaning a soft, sweet lullaby. The same lullaby she used to sing to me when I was a little girl. Mark was standing by the coffee maker, pouring a mug. As he handed it to her, his hand lingered on hers. They exchanged a look, a fleeting, knowing glance of shared intimacy right over my daughter's head. I felt a tear slip down my face, hot and furious. It was one thing for a husband to betray his wife, but the woman who carried me for 9 months, the woman who watched me take my first steps, she was looking at my husband with the same eyes she used to look at my father. It was a level of depravity that my mind could barely process. I wiped my face, forced my expression into a mask of pure exhaustion, and walked down the stairs. "Good morning, sweetie," my mother chirped, her voice dripping with that sickening maternal warmth. "Look at you. You look absolutely exhausted. Did Lily keep you up?" "Yeah," I lied, keeping my eyes fixed on the coffee mug in my hand so I wouldn't have to look. Her in the eye. Just a rough night. My head feels completely scrambled. Mark stepped up behind me, rubbing my shoulders. "See, honey? This is exactly why we told you to stop stressing. Your mom is here. Let us take care of things. You're just letting your postpartum anxiety get the better of you." Hearing him use my medical vulnerability to cover up his own sins, while my mother nodded along in fake sympathy, was the moment something died inside me. The sadness didn't disappear, but it hardened into ice. They wanted me to be the crazy, unstable, postpartum wife. They needed me to doubt my own sanity so they could keep their perfect little arrangement going. For the next 5 days, I lived in an absolute living hell. I had to play the role of the fragile, grateful wife. I sat at the dinner table and ate food my mother cooked, watching her laugh at Mark's jokes. I watched Mark kiss me goodbye for work, knowing he was going to text her from his office parking lot 5 minutes later. Every single interaction felt like a theater performance where I was the only actor who knew the play was a tragedy. Multiple times a day, I would lock myself in the nursery, holding Lily tight against my chest, whispering to her in the dark. "It's just you and me, baby," I would whisper, tears soaking into her tiny sleeper. "It's just you and me now." But I wasn't just crying in the dark. I was watching. I was documenting. Every time Mark left his phone face down, I didn't try to look at it anymore. I already had what I needed. Instead, I began keeping a meticulous log of the exact times my mother came over, the times Mark left for late work meetings, and the sudden, unexplained cash withdrawals from our joint bank account. They thought my silence was weakness. They thought my quietness meant I was breaking down under the weight of my depression. They had no idea that I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to pull the rug out from beneath their feet. On Friday afternoon, while Mark was at work and my mother was back in the guest house taking a nap, I called a local divorce attorney from a burner app on my phone. My voice didn't shake. The sadness was still there, a hollow echoing chamber in my soul, but my mind was razor sharp. I need a consultation, I told the lawyer, and I have all the evidence we will ever need. The lawyer's office was located on the 4th floor of a cold gray brick building downtown. It felt entirely different from our warm, sunlit suburban home. Sitting across from a woman named Sarah, who had a kind but fiercely professional demeanor, I felt like a ghost haunting a stranger's life. I handed her my phone. On it was the digital file containing every single screenshot, timestamp, and bank statement I had compiled over the last 5 days. Sarah slid her glasses up her nose and began to scroll. The room was completely silent except for the soft click of her mouse and the heavy, ragged sound of my own breathing. I watched her face. I expected shock. I expected horror. Instead, her expression hardened into a look of profound professional anger. She looked up at me, her eyes softening. "I am so incredibly sorry," she said softly. "I've seen a lot of ugly things in this line of work, but a double betrayal like this, from a spouse and a parent while you are recovering from childbirth, it's monstrous." Hearing a professional validate my reality washed over me like rain after a drought. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't just a paranoid, emotional new mother suffering from postpartum anxiety. I was a victim of a cruel, calculated conspiracy in my own home. "What do we do next?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet steadier than it had been in weeks. "We protect you, and we protect Lily," Sarah replied firmly. She pulled up our joint financial records on her screen. As she dug deeper, the betrayal grew even darker. Mark hadn't just been stealing my mother's affection, they were stealing our future. Over the past 4 months, Mark had transferred over $20,000 out of our joint savings account, money we had set aside for Lily's college fund. The destination? A private, separate bank account under my mother's name. They were funding their secret rendezvous and building a nest egg using the money meant for my daughter. The sadness inside me grew so heavy it felt like lead in my veins. My mother had stolen my husband, and my husband had stolen from our baby. Any lingering desire I had to cry, to scream, or to beg Mark for an explanation evaporated in that cold office. They had left me with nothing but my daughter and my dignity. I was going to use both to destroy them. "I want the divorce papers finalized by Friday," I told Sarah, "and I want full custody of Lily. I don't want either of them ever touching her again." "We can do that," Sarah said, printing out the initial filings. "But how do you want to serve him?" "We can have a processor deliver them to his office." I looked at the thick stack of papers, then looked at the printed screenshots of their vile messages mocking my depression. "No," I said, a cold, unyielding resolve settling into my chest. "I want to deliver them myself. This Sunday is our regular family dinner. Every Sunday evening, my entire family gathered at our main house. My father, my 2 older siblings, and their spouses would all come over. My mother would help cook, and Mark would play the doting, perfect host. They loved the theater of our perfect family. They loved wearing their masks in front of a crowd. I spent Saturday night while Mark was asleep, sitting on the floor of the nursery. Lily was fast asleep in her crib, her tiny chest rising and falling in perfect peace. By the dim light of a small lamp, I assembled 6 identical white envelopes. Inside each one, I placed a complete copy of the divorce petition, the financial theft records, and the explicit text messages between my husband and my mother. I sealed each envelope with deliberate, quiet care. On the front of each one, I wrote a name in neat black cursive. Dad, Michael; Jessica, Mark, Mom. I stacked them neatly on the bottom shelf of the linen closet, right next to the baby blankets. They looked completely innocent. Just a few pieces of paper in white envelopes, but I knew that within 24 hours, those envelopes would burn my entire world to ash. And as I finally lay down to sleep next to the stranger who used to be my husband, I felt a terrifyingly calm peace. The storm was coming, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the wreckage. The air in the dining room was thick with the scent of roasted garlic and rosemary. My father sat at the head of the table, laughing at a story my brother Michael was telling. My sister Jessica was pouring wine, while Mark sat directly across from me, his sleeves rolled up, playing the part of the perfect, attentive son-in-law. My mother walked out from the kitchen, holding a heavy ceramic serving dish. She set it down in the center of the table and smiled warmly at me. "Everything's ready, sweetie. You just sit there and relax. You look so tired today." "I'm doing okay, Mom," I said, my voice terrifyingly calm. I looked around the table at the people who shared my blood, and then at the 2 people who had quietly bled me dry. Mark reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You're doing great, honey. We're all so proud of how hard you're working to get through this rough patch." He smiled, a sickeningly sweet expression meant to show everyone what a supportive husband he was. I gently pulled my hand away, stood up from my chair, and walked over to the hallway closet. My heart wasn't pounding anymore. The frantic panic of the past week had hardened into an absolute, icy stillness. I reached into the closet and pulled out the 6 white envelopes. When I walked back into the dining room, the conversation died down. My father looked up, a confused smile on his face. "What's all this, sweetie?" I walked around the table, placing an envelope face down in front of my father, my brother, and my sister. I walked over to my mother, setting her envelope right next to her wine glass. Finally, I walked over to Mark, dropping his envelope directly onto his dinner plate. "I wanted to give everyone a small token of my appreciation," I said, standing at the head of the table, right next to my father. "Since everyone keeps talking about how tired and anxious I've been, I wanted to share the source of my stress. I think it's time we all start being completely honest." Mark laughed nervously, his fingers twitching toward the edge of the envelope. "Babe, what is this? Is this a joke? If this is about your postpartum anxiety, maybe we should talk upstairs." "Open it, Mark," I interrupted, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. My father was the first to slide his thumb under the seal. He pulled out the thick stack of papers. The room was deathly quiet except for the crisp, violent sound of paper tearing. I watched Mark's face as he pulled out the document. His eyes drifted over the first page, the legal heading of the divorce petition. Then his eyes hit the second page. It was a blown-up, crystal-clear screenshot of his text exchange with my mother, where he called me useless and she told him I was too weak to question anything. The blood completely drained from Mark's face. He went an ash-gray color, his mouth opening slightly but no sound coming out. Beside him, my mother had opened hers. She gasped, a sharp, suffocating sound, and dropped the papers onto the table. Her eyes darted to me, filled with a sudden, primal terror. "Sweetie, no, this is a misunderstanding," she stammered, her voice shaking violently. "Read the third page, Dad," I said softly, looking at my father. My father was reading the financial statements. He looked at the record showing $20,000 stolen from his granddaughter's future to fund his wife's affair. I watched my father's face transform. The warm, jovial expression he always wore crumpled into a look of absolute, devastating betrayal. He stood up from his chair so fast it fell backward, crashing loudly against the hardwood floor. He didn't look at Mark. He looked at my mother, his wife of 35 years. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling with a terrifying rage. "What did you do?" "Michael, Jessica." My mother sobbed, turning to my siblings, her hands reaching out blindly. "Please, she's sick. She's having a breakdown. You know how she's been since the baby." "Shut up," my sister Jessica screamed, slamming her hands on the table as tears streamed down her face. She had scrolled to the messages where my mother joked about leaving the back door unlocked while I was sedated on medication. "You are a monster. How could you do this to your own daughter?" Mark stood up, stepping toward me, his hands raised in a desperate plea. "Babe, listen to me. I was stressed. I made a mistake. We can fix this. Think about Lily." "Don't you dare say her name," I said, the words coming out cold, steady, and sharp. "You stole from her. You built a life out of my pain right under my nose. Your bags are already packed. They are sitting on the front lawn. If you aren't out of this house in 5 minutes, the police will be here to remove you for financial fraud." I looked at my mother, who was now weeping hysterically, her face buried in her hands. "And you," I said, staring at the woman who gave me life. "You are dead to me. You will never see me again, and you will never, ever lay eyes on my daughter." I turned around, walked out of the dining room, and went upstairs to the nursery. As I shut the door behind me, blocking out the explosive shouting, sobbing, and shattering glass from the dining room below, I walked over to Lily's crib. She was sound asleep, blissfully unaware of the fire burning downstairs. I scooped her up into my arms, held her tight against my chest, and let out the first breath I had truly taken in 3 weeks. The house I built was gone. But as I held my daughter in the quiet room, I knew that the foundation we were standing on now was entirely mine. The silence that followed that Sunday dinner was different from the heavy, suffocating silence of the weeks before. This was a clean, empty quiet. Mark's car had sped out of the driveway within 10 minutes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. My siblings had helped my father pack his things, and by midnight the main house was empty. The guest house on our property sat dark, its doors locked, a physical monument to a betrayal that would haunt our family name for generations. The months that followed felt like a slow, gray blur of legal proceedings and administrative finalities. Mark tried to fight the divorce at first, sending long, desperate emails filled with apologies, excuses, and pleas to see Lily. But Sarah, my attorney, was unyielding. When faced with the undeniable paper trail of the stolen funds and the explicit texts detailing how they exploited my postpartum depression, Mark's high-priced lawyer advised him to settle quietly. He signed away everything. I got the house, the remaining savings, and sole legal and physical custody of Lily. He was granted minimal supervised visitation, but he has yet to use it. A week after the papers were finalized, I learned through my sister that Mark had relocated to another state, slinking away from the wreckage he created. My mother tried a different tactic. She didn't use lawyers. She used guilt. She sent handwritten letters to my doorstep, cards for Lily's milestones, and voicemails weeping, begging for a chance to explain. "I lost my mind," she wrote in one letter. "I was lonely and I made a horrible mistake. But I am still your mother." Every single letter went directly into the fireplace, unopened. Every voicemail was deleted within seconds. The woman who birthed me died to me the moment she stepped into my bedroom while I was sedated. It is a harsh, cold reality to live with, but protecting my daughter means keeping monsters away from her cradle, even if those monsters share our blood. The hardest part wasn't cutting them out. It was watching what it did to my father. 35 years of marriage vanished in a single evening. He moved into a small apartment near my brother's house, his shoulders permanently hunched, a shadow of the vibrant man he used to be. But twice a week he comes over to my house. He sits on that new, white linen sofa, cradling Lily on his lap, watching her play with her toys. We don't talk about my mother. We don't talk about Mark. We just sit in the quiet strength of what we have left, patching together the pieces of our broken family today. Marks exactly 6 months since that devastating Tuesday night when the phone lit up on the bathroom counter. It is raining again, a soft, steady summer shower that taps gently against the glass of the nursery window. Lily is sitting on the floor, laughing as she tries to stack plastic cups, her bright blue eyes completely free of the sorrow that defines my world. I look at her, and for the first time in a very long time, the heavy ache in my chest doesn't feel like lead. It feels like a scar. It is a reminder of a wound that nearly destroyed me, but it is also proof that I healed. I lost my husband and I lost my mother. The life I thought I was building turned out to be a beautiful lie. But as I look at my daughter, I realize that the truth, no matter how brutal, is always better than a gilded cage. I am no longer the fragile, exhausted, gaslit woman standing alone in a dark kitchen. I am a mother who survived the worst kind of storm, and I am finally ready to build a real home.